My name is Charlotte. I've been married to my husband Derek for almost 7 years. We don't have children, but we enjoy our daily life just the way it is. When people hear that we don't have children, they often ask, "Don't your in-laws say anything? Are you okay?" But there's never been anything like that. When we told my in-laws that we were having trouble conceiving, I was nervous that they might say something. But both my father-in-law and mother-in-law didn't blame me at all and simply said, "Thank you for telling us." My mother-in-law even said, "If you two are happy, that's enough." I remember feeling embarrassed and crying right then and there. We told my in-laws about our situation after 3 years of marriage. Almost 4 years have passed since then, and I still have a good relationship with my in-laws. There's never been any bad treatment, and we regularly stay in touch, even going out to eat together. One day while I was at work, I got a call from my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law has always been sensible and never called me during work before, so when I got the call, I knew something must have happened. Feeling anxious, I stepped away from my desk and answered the phone quickly. "Mother-in-law? What's wrong?" Then my mother-in-law said, panting over the phone, Your father-in-law has... Father-in-law? What happened to my father-in-law? Your father-in-law? He's been taken in an ambulance." "What?" I told my boss what happened and left work early. My mother-in-law said she'd also contacted my husband, but he never checks his phone during work, so he didn't notice. I called my husband's office, explained the situation, and asked to speak to him. After understanding what had happened, my husband said, "I'll head to the hospital now. Please, go there too, Charlotte." My husband and I arrived at the hospital at almost the same time and were able to meet near the reception. As we were about to look for mother-in-law, my brother-in-law Eugene spotted us and called out, "Brother, sister-in-law, over here." We followed Eugene to father-in-law's hospital room as he directed, but by the time we got there, it was too late. In the room, my mother-in-law was crying loudly and my sister-in-law, Marie, was holding back tears. Father-in-law had passed away, looking like he was asleep. I can't believe it, father-in-law." I couldn't help but let tears flow. My husband and brother-in-law comforted me and the others, but when I stepped out into the hallway, both of them were covering their faces with their hands. As the daughter-in-law, I was overwhelmed with tears, so I can only imagine how much sadder my husband and brother-in-law, the actual sons, must have felt. I thought they probably wanted to cry as much as mother-in-law. I thought so. The funeral for father-in-law was over in the blink of an eye, and about 2 weeks had passed when my husband and I were told by my mother-in-law that she wanted to talk to us on our next day off, so we headed to her house. When we arrived, my brother-in-law and his wife were already there, and mother-in-law said, "I'm glad she came. Come on, sit down, sit down." She seated us, and then my husband asked, "Mother, what's the talk about?" With a serious look on her face, mother-in-law looked at us and said, "Mom, about the talk." When my husband starts like that, mother-in-law looks at us with a serious face and says, "Thank you all for helping out with Dad's funeral. Thanks to you, everything went smoothly." "Thank you," mother-in-law says, bowing her head. Her son-in-law responds, "What are you talking about, Mom? We're family after all." We all nod in agreement with his words. Then, with an apologetic look on her face, mother-in-law starts, "And there's something I gathered you all here to ask." She then explains why she called us. She's feeling uncertain about living alone after father-in-law's death. The family home is aging and she's considering rebuilding, and if possible, she wants to live with either our family or her son's family. Mother-in-law keeps saying, "I'm sorry for being so selfish." It's not selfish at all. She's getting old, and after losing father-in-law so suddenly, it's natural for her to feel vulnerable. I would like to live with her if we can, but we live quite far from her, and with our work, moving here isn't possible. "I'm sorry, Mom, we can't do it right now." When my husband says that, my mother-in-law drops her shoulders. "I understand." Then my brother-in-law says cheerfully, "We'll live with you." "But Eugene, you work at a company, don't you?" I ask. He smiles and says, "My company is pushing for remote work now, and many are moving to the countryside. Since Marie is a housewife, I think it's better if we live together." His wife agrees. "Yes, it will be reassuring." Mother-in-law sheds tears of joy. My husband and I feel a bit guilty for leaving everything to them, but if this makes mother-in-law feel a bit more comfortable, we want them to do it. "Eugene, are you sure? We're leaving it all to you." To that question he replies, it's fine. Just come and help us if something happens, haha." We agreed to let them take care of mother-in-law as long as we help if needed. About a year later, a new house is built and mother-in-law lives with them. 2 years later, they have a daughter, Cecilia, and mother-in-law is delighted. Since we don't have children, our niece is very dear to us, and we visit the new family home about once a month. But 7 years later, just before the 10th anniversary of father-in-law's death, we get sudden news. My brother-in-law has died. My husband and I rushed to the hospital, but like with father-in-law, we're too late. It was so sudden that we thought it was an accident or a sudden ailment, but it turned out to be cancer. About a year ago, they found cancer in him, and it was already in the final stages. Because of his youth, it progressed quickly, spreading to his bones. Despite trying various treatments, he passed away. He had told mother-in-law and his wife not to tell us so as not to worry us. I'm sorry for keeping silent. Mother-in-law and sister-in-law kept bowing their heads to us, apologizing again and again. But we couldn't take our frustration on them. They had to be suffering more than us living together in such close quarters. Just like when father-in-law passed, the funeral was over in a flash, and about a month and a half went by. That day, after work, we were watching a movie together at home. Suddenly, my husband's phone rang. It was mother-in-law saying, "Marie told me to leave the house."
"What? Marie? You're joking, right?"
My husband asked, half joking, but mother-in-law started crying and shouting, "It's true! She said she wants me to leave as soon as possible." We couldn't believe it. Mother-in-law and sister-in-law were usually close, like real mother and daughter. Even when the brother-in-law passed away, they cooperated and helped each other through it. No matter how much my husband tried to verify the truth, mother-in-law insisted that sister-in-law was trying to kick her out. He said, "I'll come over tomorrow. Wait until then," and hung up the phone. Marie kicking out your mother? That's impossible, right? When I asked my husband, he seemed to agree, saying, "I think so too, but mom doesn't need to lie. Anyway, I'll check it out tomorrow." The next day, my husband had the day off from work, so he went to his family's house in the morning, but didn't return home until after midnight. He looked exhausted when he got home and told me what happened today while drinking a beer. When he arrived at his family's home, the atmosphere was already tense, and neither mother-in-law nor sister-in-law would speak to each other. When he sat them down on the sofa to talk, the sister-in-law said, "I have no choice but to ask mother-in-law to leave." "How can you say that? This was originally my house," mother-in-law shouted, and the conversation broke down. My husband asked sister-in-law why she wanted mother-in-law to leave, but she just said, "I can't tell you. It will also affect you if we continue like this." But I had no idea what she was talking about. Mother-in-law was also getting angrier because of the sudden demand to leave, and finally yelled at the sister-in-law, "If you don't like it, you leave." My husband calmed her down and came home. I felt tired just listening to the story. We don't know why sister-in-law started saying these things, but she's alone with no parents or relatives and has children. If she leaves that house, life will be tough. Isn't there a better way? I thought for a while, but without knowing why sister-in-law was saying this, we couldn't move forward. I suggested to my husband, and we decided to go to his family's house together the next day. When we arrived, it was just as my husband had said. Mother-in-law and sister-in-law were already arguing when we arrived, and our 7-year-old niece, Cecilia, was trying to mediate. "Hey, both of you, stop it. Cecilia's here too." My husband stopped the two of them arguing. "But Marie is..." "Because mother-in-law won't leave." And so the two continued to glare at each other, angry and agitated. I urged them to calm down for the moment, saying, "Both of you, please calm down. Let's talk this through." Then I sat them down on the sofa. My husband made coffee, and it helped the two of them relax. After they both drank some coffee and seemed to have calmed down, I started the conversation. "So to get to the point, first of all, Marie, why did you tell your mother-in-law to leave?" I asked, but my sister-in-law just hung her head in silence. My mother-in-law said with disbelief, "You just hate me, don't you? That's why you want me to leave." My sister-in-law snapped back, raising her face. "Hate? If anything, aren't you the one who hates me?" And tears fell from her eyes. An unexpected turn of events left my husband and me in shock. There was no way my mother-in-law could hate her. We could see that just by watching them. "Marie, your mother-in-law doesn't hate you. You're her precious son's wife." With those words, something broke inside my sister-in-law, and she began to cry uncontrollably. I patted her back, waiting for her to calm down. After a while, when her breathing seemed to have stabilized, I asked, "Can you tell me what happened?" "Actually, my aunt told me that things will be miserable if they continue like this." "What? Your aunt?" When I asked this, she slowly began to speak. Once I heard everything, I felt like my anger was going to explode. It wasn't just me. My husband and mother-in-law felt the same. What she told us was unbelievable. According to her, after her husband died, she met Aunt, my father-in-law's sister, at the funeral, who spoke to her. Aunt warned my sister-in-law who was going to live with my mother-in-law, "That woman is really wicked, you know. You, your daughter, none of you will be treated well. She used to bully the wife of her eldest son. She just hid her true nature because her son was around. Now you'll see how." She repeatedly scarred her with terrifying words. Furthermore, she wickedly whispered that since my brother-in-law contributed money to the new house, she had the right to live there and should kick out the mother-in-law. At first, my sister-in-law didn't believe it, but hearing that I had been bullied by my mother-in-law frightened her. Of course, I was never bullied by my mother-in-law. It was a complete lie. If only you had checked with me. Crying, she apologized. I'm truly sorry. The whole incident was clearly Aunt's fault. Aunt, my father-in-law's sister, had always been antagonistic towards my mother-in-law and kept saying nasty things, as I later learned from my mother-in-law. Of course, my sister-in-law also has some responsibility for believing Aunt completely, but I thought anyone would be scared if told such things when emotionally unstable after losing her husband. My mother-in-law, learning everything, said, "So that's what happened. But Marie, do you think I'll do such a thing in the future? I think of you as my own daughter." Smiling and shedding tears. Even my sister-in-law never truly believed that my mother-in-law was that kind of person. "Mother-in-law, I'm really sorry." She said this, tears in her eyes as she bowed her head. After that, we went to Aunt's house and spoke about the matter in front of her husband. It seemed like she did it just for fun, but she defended herself. "That's not it. It was just a small joke." But even if it was a joke to Aunt, it almost ruined our lives. Of course, neither my husband nor I could forgive her. Aunt kept insisting that she wasn't in the wrong, but Aunt's husband, unable to watch her any longer, yelled, "Enough! It's all your fault. Apologize." Aunt's face turned pale, and eventually it seemed she was confronted with divorce. I later heard that she was kicked out of the house, left with almost nothing. Many things have happened, but my mother-in-law and sister-in-law are still living together. This incident led them to be more open and honest with each other, it seems. Even when we went to visit, there were more arguments and squabbles. However, it wasn't something that made us uneasy to watch, but rather something that we understood to be the result of trust. Somehow, both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law seemed more lively than before. My mother-in-law adores her cute grandchild, and now she's even thinking about adopting my sister-in-law. I guess there's nothing to worry about anymore. Strangely enough, even the pictures of my father-in-law and brother-in-law on the wall seem to be smiling more than before.